Greetings, good afternoon or good evening. The anniversary of the human space flight. Everybody knows the name Gagarin as the person who was the first human in space. But how many people know about the man who actually got him there? Serhiy Korolyov, who really was the architect, Ukrainian architect of the Soviet space program. Of course, there are many reasons perhaps why he is not known. First of all, that his name existence was classified up until his death. So he was never acknowledged. So that's probably one of the reasons. And after he was acknowledged, I think probably people just didn't focus on that. We'll have a short video that will talk about him and really how he firmly established his Ukrainian roots, including the fact that the first song sung in space was his childhood favorite song, which was Ukrainian. So now to the video.
Korolyov was a great son of Ukraine. He is remembered as the chief designer of Soviet Union's space missiles. Korolyov grew up in Nizhin, a quiet city in the heartland of Ukraine. In early age, he got fascinated by a flight performance of Serhiy, the legendary aviator from Odessa. Now, his cherished dream was to fly and to make aircraft. This song that he heard from his mother became his lifelong favorite. Many years later, Pavlo Popovich sang this song from his spaceship for Korolyov. That was the first ever radio performance of a song from a spaceship. Korolyov designed his first aircraft when he was 17. Later at college, he built and piloted gliders of his own design. Since 1931, Korolyov became a pioneer in developing jet-propelled aircraft. In 1938, Stalin's secret police arrested him on phony charges as a Trotsky supporter. Korolyov lived through tortures and a Gulag labor camp. Then he spent more than 5 years behind bars doing R&D work for the military. In post-war years, Korolyov's bureau produced a line of ballistic missiles, but he considered it only a step to the bigger goal, space flights. For several years, he was sending memos trying to persuade the Kremlin to authorize a space flights program. Once it was authorized, in less than a year, Korolyov launched world's first man-made satellite and then the first manned spacecraft with world-famous Yuri Gagarin. The Kremlin exploited those advances for its Cold War propaganda. But Korolyov's name and identity remained top secret in the USSR. The Kremlin received an informal offer from the Nobel Committee to nominate the chief designer for the world's greatest prize. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev replied, "No, thank you. This merit belongs to the whole Soviet nation." But the USSR was about to lose the Cold War space race. The Kremlin could not sustain it after Korolyov's death. He died at the age of 59, likely due to consequences of an old injury in the Gulag.
I want to also take this opportunity to thank Ambassador Yelchenko and the embassy for continuing the tradition of our cooperation. I really regret that COVID prevented us from having in-person events. I believe the last time I saw you was in front of the Lincoln Memorial in the spring of 2020 when we were commemorating the Heavenly Hundred. So I now turn the podium to Ambassador Yelchenko. I believe that you also have some personal experience with some of the people that we've been discussing. Ambassador Yelchenko, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning in the United States and good evening in Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the organizers, to our main partners, and you, Nadia, personally for bringing us together. This is such a highly esteemed group of panelists who can share their stories of Ukrainian input in space exploration. On 12th of April, we all celebrated the International Day of Human Space Flight. It's been 60 years since the day of the first human appearance in space. And we all, of course, remember and pay tribute to Yuri Gagarin, who became this very first human in space. I had a personal privilege and honor to know him in person, although I was only 5 and 6 years old when I met him for the first time. My parents used to spend their summer holidays with the family of Yuri Gagarin in the 60s, actually until his tragic death. And I even have in my home library some of the pictures. Well, they are back in Kiev. Unfortunately, I don't have them with me. The famous one, which I'm proud to show to everyone, is when I play billiard in Crimea in attack with Yuri Gagarin. You can only see my head, over the billiard table, and Gagarin who is playing with me. I also cherish memories and letters which were sent to me through my father by the first man who went into outer space, Alexei Leonov, who was also the friend of my parents, and German Titov, who became the second man who came into space. I remember well the postcard which was signed by Leonov, addressed to me, and he wrote down that Volodya, eat better and you will become the cosmonaut. So this is a couple of my personal stories. But to come back to the topic, a lot of ideas and research that were the driving force of the development of space exploration belonged to the Ukrainian scientists, and their names are known worldwide and became a living legend. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, whose ancestors hail from Volyn, Ukraine, is praised by NASA as one of the fathers of rocketry and cosmonautics, along with Goddard and Oberth. The rocket theoretic Yuri Kondratyuk, who was born in Poltava, Ukraine, paved the way to the moon, as he developed the first known lunar orbit rendezvous, which was later used for the planning of the Apollo program's first actual human space flight to the moon. And of course, as you mentioned in the video, under the leadership of Serhiy Korolyov, who was born in Zhytomyr, Ukraine, the first human-made satellite, Sputnik 1, was launched on October 4, 1957. We are working now with the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum to duly reflect his Ukrainian and not Russian origin in its exhibition. In 1997, Leonid Kadenyuk became the first citizen of independent Ukraine to make a trip into space. He was a member of the international team on the US Space Shuttle Columbia, and he spent 15 days and 16 hours in space. On gaining independence, Ukraine has retained its prestigious status as a space state and now continues to develop the space sector. And it's widely recognized in the world. In one of his tweets, Elon Musk praised the role of Ukraine in the space revolution. I would also like to mention the development of cooperation between Ukraine and the United States in space research and exploration. As an example, let me mention 14 successful launches of the Antares program. The first stage of the rocket was developed by Ukrainian design bureau Yuzhnoye. I would like to underscore that space research and exploration are the cutting edge of the technologies developed by the humanity. Ukraine is honored to be among the very few members of the Space Club countries, and we're happy that in this endeavor, Ukraine and the United States are members of one united crew, reaching to the stars. As the saying goes, per aspera ad astra. Let me once again wish you all and all of us the happy 60th anniversary of the first human flight into space. And I really look forward to our discussion and Q&A session. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for filling in the picture of Ukrainians' contribution to the early stages of the space program. It is now my pleasure to introduce astronaut Heidi Stefanishin-Pfeiffer. In 2012, we had the honor of awarding Heidi and Kadeniuk Stars of Ukraine. That was on the occasion of the 20th anniversary, I believe, of the space agency. We, through our programs, like to remind the contributions that Ukrainians make to the world, be they from Ukraine directly or find themselves in other countries like Heidi. Heidi's resume is really compelling, and she is quite an accomplished woman. She's a captain at the US Navy and was also a former astronaut. She's had 2 space flights, 5 space walks, which totaled, I think, 33 hours and 42 minutes. But for me, perhaps the most intriguing is that she is a qualified salvage officer and has been a part or managed several major salvage projects, including the one of the Exxon Houston off the coast of the Barbers Point. And then also she developed the salvage plan for the Portuguese who were trying to salvage one of their, Peruvian, trying to salvage one of their submarines off the island of Oahu, Hawaii. She was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, very active in the Ukrainian American community. She married Glenn Piper, and they have a son named Michael. Heidi Stefanishin-Pfeiffer has used her hyphenated name to as a reminder of her family's roots. And now it is my pleasure to turn over the podium to Heidi, who will participate as well as moderate the discussion. Heidi, thank you. Off to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nadia, for that wonderful introduction. And good morning to all of our viewers and to our viewers in Ukraine. Dobry večer. As Nadia had mentioned, I am a retired NASA astronaut and also of Ukrainian descent. My father emigrated from Western Ukraine, from Lvivshchina. And growing up in Minnesota, spaceflight has always captivated, children around the world. And I was no different, maybe just a little bit different because of the time frame. Growing up, being 6 years old when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. And at that time, didn't think much of space. The one recollection that I do remember when seeing a space flight and thinking about it was in 1975, when NASA and the Soviet Union participated in the Apollo-Soyuz test program, where they joined an Apollo and a Soyuz capsule in space. And at the time, I remember watching it and listening to some of the audio and thinking that, I could do that mission and I can actually understand what they're saying. Having grown up speaking Ukrainian, it was similar enough to Russian that even as a 13-year-old, I could start understanding Russian. But little did I know that that was going to come and go. And eventually one thing led to another, and I became part of the astronaut program and had the honor to fly in space and visit the International Space Station, do spacewalks. And even though I was an American, there was no doubt amongst my crew members and folks that saw me that knew that I was a little bit different than most other American astronauts because of that long first name, Stefanishin. And I was also able to take little memories of Ukraine with me. I had a small flag of Ukraine that I kept with me and took pictures in space. And you mentioned the songs in space. And on the shuttle, there's wake-up music every morning that's played for the astronauts. And on both my flights, I had a Ukrainian song play for me. On my first mission, it was a rendition that the words were Taras Shevchenko. Учитеся, брати мої, думайте, читайте. My second flight, one morning we were woken up to that lively rendition of another Ukrainian song. And one other thing I also had at NASA was the opportunity to meet Leonid Kadeniuk, because when he flew on STS 87, I had just started my career at NASA. And so when I first met Kadeniuk, I remember one of the things he told me is when he saw me, he says, I knew immediately that you were Ukrainian because of the way you wore your hair. I had long hair and my hair was in braids. And he told me that that was typical Ukrainian. And you know what? I have no doubt that there are going to be others in space, whether they are of Ukrainian descent, as I was, or if there will be another Ukrainian astronaut. And so I think that people around the world are going to see more astronauts. And because astronauts are typically what people associate with this space program, they're the ones they see. And that Ukrainian name will continue to be in space. And so now I would like to give the floor to the chairman. And now I'd like to give the floor to the chairman of the State Space Agency of Ukraine, Volodymyr Tavtai, to tell us about Ukraine's current aerospace industry. So Chairman Tavtai, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be on this meeting, and thank you, all participants of this meeting, especially Ms. McConnell for organizing all this. First of all, I would like to be back to 12th of April of 19. And well, it's a very important date, and so it's very important because not only we have sent some kind of equipment to the space, we had an event when first person went to the space. The first time in a man was far away from the Earth and was able to see the Earth from distance. I believe it was something very important, more than technical achievement, but probably it was more something emotional. It brought everyone in the world to understand space is more closer than we thought. It's reachable. We can go there and we can reach this altitude. We can go and reach the space. And it was a moment when we, from our dreams, we came to the real situation when we can plan further missions to the moon, to the Mars, or anywhere in the space. It's something. It's an event that have changed our mind about space activity. And I think it's very important. And I definitely very proud that Ukraine at this moment, as a part of Soviet Union, was part of this success. We had our components at the rocket. We had even, I think it was not even part of the rocket, but it was very important that the recorder was made in Ukraine, and the recorder recorded the voice of Yuri Gagarin when he was in the space. Beyond the other equipment, control system, and other subsystems. But it's great to have successful events in the past, but it's very important what we have today and what we will have tomorrow. And all our history, it's our base, it's something which brings us to understand how we can act in the future. And it's very important. We definitely have our industry working hard, creating new techniques, new systems for the space, and we are proud to participate in cooperation with US in terms of launching cargo ships to International Space Station in frames of program of Antares and others. And we definitely very proud of being able to send our own space astronaut, Leonid Kadeniuk. He went to the space already during independence of Ukraine. But even more interesting, I believe, it's a cooperation in frames of program Artemida. I think it's a very prospective, and I think it's something which will bring us to the future successful missions. It's missions to the moon, it's a mission to the Mars. And honestly saying, I personally really believe that space flights will change the way it is now. I absolutely sure that next 10, 15, 20 years, it will be totally different way of access of people to the space. I believe it will be faster, cheaper, easier, and probably it will be different technological solutions. And I believe that at this moment we need to join our efforts all over the world to find the most effective way how to do that, how to explore space in a very economically effective way. I think that those types of programs like Artemida, it's a real way to success. That's a program which brings us to the future openings, the future success in exploration. You know that Ukraine is a member of United Nations for space since 1991. And from 2010, it takes part in a program which called SPIDER United Nations. I'm also proud that representative of Ukraine, Oleg Vinkovsky, he's director of representation of Yuzhno in Brussels. He was nominated to Committee Bureau of United Stations United Nations for space as a second deputy of head of committee for 2022 and 2023 for next 2 years. And I'm very proud of this, and I'm really look forward and further cooperation in space with United States and with all nations in a space to explore space in a civil manner. I believe it's our goal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman Taftai. And I also share your enthusiasm for the future of the Ukrainian space program. And next, I would like to ask Acting Chief Historian of NASA, Brian Odom, to share about NASA's international cooperations over the past decades and what the future cooperations hold. Brian, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Heidi, and thank you for everyone who put this together, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you here today. It's hard to follow all the remarks that have already happened this morning. The mention of Tsiolkovsky and Korolyov, and the importance that they play in human spaceflight is just incredibly important, and that's so to know that, Mr. Ambassador, that you've actually been in the presence of Gagarin is important. And I'd love to get together with you sometime and see those photos. That's kind of an amazing story. And as a historian, I do spend most of my academic life, just living in the past, thinking about these things in terms of what has happened, the great accomplishments. Obviously, this week is a big week for that. Working as a historian at NASA, I'm continuously looking to the future and thinking about what that future might bring. I'm certainly excited about this opportunity to talk today about the United States and Ukraine's past accomplishments, as well as the current and future collaboration. So thank you for that. The early years of the space age were characterized by competition. It was a paradigm of a Cold War. It was born of that post-World War II world. Major breakthroughs were accomplished by the Americans and the Soviet programs. One that we're celebrating this week, obviously, that's critically important, is the first human in space, Yuri Gagarin, whose flight on April 2nd, 1961, really did open up a new age of human spaceflight. Sputnik before it had, in October of 1957, had been a major breakthrough, but this was something incredibly different. This was something that spoke to humanity. The work of the Ukrainian rocket designer Serhiy Korolyov obviously was critical to all those early successes of the Soviet space program. Being someone who's steeped in researching Apollo's history, I'm very familiar with the story of Korolyov and very familiar with how important he was. We had numbers of people working across across the agency at NASA at the same time. It seems to me there's almost this mythical world of Korolyov that he was filling all of those positions single-handedly. So that he's always a very compelling figure. Attempts at cooperation in the early period were present even then. During his presidency, John F. Kennedy worked with Nikita Khrushchev on agreements of exchanging weather data from satellites, joint efforts to map Earth's geomagnetic field, and cooperation in the realm of experimental communications relay. It seemed that science and engineering, the political world be damned, right? The passage of the Outer Space Treaty in 1967 represents another major, truly important milestone with the creation of the first legal framework for peaceful space activities. And as that treaty firmly states, quote, the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interest of all countries, irrespective of their degree of economic and scientific development, and shall be the province of all mankind. And I think that's the key piece of it. The Cold War space race, while it did accomplish incredible, spectacular feats, it proved to be not a sustainable model for long-term human presence in space. In the aftermath of the space race, strict competition began to give way more and more to collaboration. And I think the Apollo-Soyuz test project, 1975, represented a breakthrough moment. It is the easing of hostilities temporarily, but it was a moment of optimism that sorely needed. Political barriers, again, were no obstacle to scientific and technological progress. Cooperation between the United States and Ukraine continued in 1997 when Leonid Konyuk did become the first Ukrainian citizen to fly in space aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia as a payload specialist on that mission. Incredible, important work that he carried out there, scientific, space botany experiments aboard the International Space Station. Was certainly an important milestone in the development of the relationship between the two countries. Today, human spaceflight continues to advance on several fronts. NASA currently, as was mentioned, is leading the Artemis program. This program looks to build a sustainable and robust presence on the moon while preparing for that next journey, that next leap to Mars. It's been 50 years since humans have walked on the lunar surface, back during the Apollo program. And since then, robotic exploration, deep space has seen decades of technological advancement, scientific discoveries, major breakthroughs again. For the last 20 years, humans have continuously lived and worked on the International Space Station, 250 miles above the Earth's surface, preparing for the day that we will, as human and as a spacefaring species, right, moved a little further along into the solar system. But if that mission is to succeed, its foundation cannot be the Cold War paradigm of competition. It must be built upon the twin pillars of international and commercial partnerships, working hand in hand with governments around the world. To guide that exploration and that cooperation among nations participated in this program, NASA has developed the Artemis Accords. Those accords describe a shared vision of principles grounded in that Outer Space Treaty of 1967, that legal framework. And it will create a safe and transparent environment which facilitates exploration, science, and commercial activities for all humanity to enjoy. With numerous countries and private sector players conducting missions and operations in cislunar space, it is critical that we establish a common set of principles for civil exploration and the use of outer space, as has been mentioned previously today. These accords, Artemis Accords, reflect the signatories' mutual commitments to those common principles for Artemis cooperation and represent this high-level legal, non-legal binding political commitment. On November 12th of last year, Ukraine became the 9th signatory to the Artemis Accords. With Ukraine's commitment to these principles, NASA is continuing to build the broadest and most diverse international space exploration coalition ever put together. The State Space Agency of Ukraine is an important partner to NASA, and we look forward to continuing to work together in the realm of civil space cooperation as we return to the moon and beyond to Mars. I think that's already been mentioned here is the work that's underway already for that. One major example in this cooperation is the Antares rocket. The first stage of that two-stage vehicle is built in the Ukraine. The relationship brought Ukraine into direct participation, providing cargo, supplies, scientific investigations to the ISS. When in 2013, that contract was put in place as to resupply the International Space Station under the Commercial Resupply Services Program. February 20th of this year, we saw the most recent launch that I think speaks directly to that cooperation and the continuation of that. As the chairman mentioned earlier too, these advancements in technology that are going to happen, that are going to change the world and change the way we do undertake space exploration. Those things are happening in government facilities, but they're also happening in commercial private industry. Firefly Aerospace, owned by the Ukrainian Max Polyakov, was recently selected by NASA as part of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. This contract is to develop and deliver 10 science investigations and technology demonstrations to the moon in 2023 as part of that program. So that's incredibly important, an incredibly important step. So just in wrapping up here, I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited to hear this conversation. As a historian at NASA, I'm always interested in hearing these stories, which, just as we've already heard today. But I'm also, again, as someone who's very interested in human space flight, to hear the possibilities and to hear the future collaboration and where it may go. So thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm excited to see where this partnership and this commitment will go in the future. Heidi?
Thank you, Brian. And I'm always amazed listening to all the little details that you don't hear about in general everyday talk or especially reading in the news about how involved Ukraine really is in the space program. And I'm very excited, just like you are, to see where it will continue and how it will continue. So thank you for sharing those details with us. And now our final panelist is the Director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, Simonetta Di Pippo, and she will highlight for us the office's priorities and international cooperations. So Director Di Pippo, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for inviting me, and I would like to really thank Your Excellency, Ambassador Yurchenko, all the distinguished speakers and the participants also to allow me to be here with you, because it's really an honor for me to join you today, really, commemorating one of the greatest achievements of not only space exploration, but I would say of human history. And we're really celebrating in a way the first human being in space, so Yuri Gagarin, but at the same time, as it has been said already a few times, we cannot forget to commemorate the mastermind behind the birth of the space era. And as the head of the Soviet space program, Ukraine board, Serhiy Korolyov, really led these first efforts in finally reaching what was once only unthinkable. Well, the 12th of April 1961, it is an historical day. People over the world marveled at how far our species have come. And even 6 decades later, we are still as impressed as we were. At least I am. I can only applaud what has been done and celebrate the participation of Ukrainian scientists, engineers, and astronauts in this great achievement. Well, the legacy that you helped create sparks imagination across the world until this day. And as we look ahead, returning to the moon, aiming for Mars, and even one day going beyond, these are the dreams and goals of today's space generation. Well, I express my wish that all we do in space in the future is increasingly supporting through joint efforts. And it is indeed encouraging to see that in Ukraine, you are thinking alike. And if we work together, we can and will do better, benefiting one another and civilization as a whole. The Office for Outer Space Affairs sits at the core of space efforts at the United Nations. Stemming from this unique position, we serve as a sort of a catalyst of international cooperation. And I'm grateful that over the years, we have enjoyed fruitful and mutually enriching relationship with Ukraine. We are very grateful for your continued support. For over 20 years, UNUSA has engaged with the country through the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which is, as mentioned already, the key forum for developing the rules of the road, or as we say, the rules of the orbit. And we have actively engaged in ensuring successful implementation and application of the international legal framework governing space activities. This depends heavily on the understanding and acceptance of the United Nations treaties and principles on outer space by policy and decision makers. To promote the ratification of the UN space treaties and assist states in building capacity in space law, UNUSA and the government of Ukraine, together with the International Center for Space Law, organized a workshop on space law in Kiev back in 2006. As we strive to create a more inclusive space industry, opening the domain to new stakeholders, such support is of a great value. Universal acceptance of existing instruments and consensual creation of new ones are both preconditions to preserving space for future generations. And again, let me underline that this is of paramount importance. At a time when space has truly become a game changer, influencing economies, industries, and daily lives of people, we assign utmost importance to responsible conduct. Our efforts in building the future we want depend considerably on space assets. Hence, the behavior of space stakeholders must uphold the highest standards. We are grateful to have Ukraine and Ukrainian experts regularly contributing to workshops and activities of the office, supporting us in establishing a prosperous and sustainable space environment. Ukraine has also strongly supported our outreach activities. At the Vienna International Center, we had the pleasure to host outstanding exhibitions showcasing countries' rich history and strength in engaging in space activities. And we are also excited to have several models of launch vehicles, so launchers, donated by Ukraine and displayed in the permanent UN exhibit at the Vienna International Center. So I have to say that, however, our great relationship does not stop here. Ukraine has also been very supportive of a dedicated program on disaster management, as was mentioned already, the UN Spider. Since 2010, the Space Research Institute has served as the UN Spider Regional Support Office, and we are really grateful to you for that. The Institute, in fact, provides both operational geospatial services and on-demand services for local authorities, international organizations, and other end users. The support of such entities towards UN Spider greatly improves the capability of the program to help save lives and manage disasters from local to international level. Looking forward, the potential for expanding the cooperation between UNOOS and Ukraine is ever growing. With great interest, I followed the developments around the country's new strategy for space industry in the period 2021-2025. The potential of Ukraine space program builds on a strong historical foundation, and I already cannot wait to see the results of the multi-year investment plan that you have. Let me reiterate that at UNOOSA we stand ready to support and explore options, how the two sides could expand, the two of us could expand our joint ventures in further invigorating the glorious space endeavors in the country. Summing up, let me once again commend the historical participation of Ukraine in pushing the boundaries of what's possible and in working with the UN in creating a space sector that everyone can benefit from in a sustainable manner. We are looking forward to seeing our cooperation grow even stronger in the future, building on our past involvement and expanding on the discussions kicked off at Unispace Plus 50. And thank you very much for inviting me again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director. That was most enlightening. And I think there might be many viewers that were not aware of all of the activities that are ongoing on the international stage. So thank you very much for those comments. Now what I'd like to do is open up our panel to our visitors to ask questions so we can have this interactive dialogue. And what I would ask is for our audience to use the Zoom function or to use the Q&A function that is part of Zoom. It is on the bottom toolbar, and you can type in your questions and I will select from those questions. So while we were waiting for our viewers to type in questions, there were some questions that were included in the registrations. And so one of them came in and they had asked that they would be interested in learning more about the personal history of Serhiy Korolyov and how he actually came to become the head of the space program. And so I would open that up. I would ask any of the panel members if they would care to comment on expanding a little bit more. I know the video did talk a lot about Korolyov's background, But if they would like to expand upon that, perhaps Ambassador, you would like to add a little bit more about Korolyov's background and knowing him as a child?
I didn't have a chance to call myself a friend of Korolyov. I was too young, of course, at that time. But I've heard a lot about him. I visited, museum devoted to his activities and his life in Zhytomyr. And besides, my mother actually, she was born in Zhytomyr. So the whole city, of course, everybody who used to live in Zhytomyr knew and was very proud about, their probably most prominent, citizen, Serhiy Korolyov. And of course, this person, well, everybody knows about his role in Soviet space exploration, but very few people know and remember, how tragic his life was. He really served a couple of years in Gulag. Actually, at that time, the Soviet authorities used to keep some prominent Soviet scientists behind the bars, actually, very isolated, and the whole secret program of the development of nuclear science, nuclear weapons, and rocket launches, and everything which was connected with the military use of nuclear power was very much closed and isolated and secret. And Korolyov was, of course, one of the prominent persons who was the part of this program. After the Second World War, of course, he has to be released because Soviet authorities could not, continue, keeping him and other scientists, his colleagues, behind the bars. And in fact, he never mentioned about that. But obviously, after his death, and especially when Ukraine became an independent country, this story, this history became known. But I think that we need to talk about this more. And of course, well, my idea while I was serving in Washington, D.C., which was not materialized, unfortunately, because of the COVID restrictions, we thought about bringing some Ukrainian rockets and other things connected with the outer space exploration into the NASA museum of how it's called, American Museum of Outer Space. And in fact, we were in the middle of negotiations already. We talked to the State Space Agency of Ukraine and some Ukrainian museums and facilities. I think that this dream will come true, and in a couple of years we will be able to display this here, because I think that many things, for example, which are kept in the Korolyov Museum in Zhytomyr, they fully deserve to be displayed in some more prominent places. I think that millions of people in normal times visit Washington, D.C., and of course the Aeronautics Museum. And I think that if we have some really historic, important things produced in Ukraine, like rockets and other things, and I know that there are some studies by Korolyov, written by his own hand. They are still in the museum. We need to, make them available for much wider, public and audience. So I think that this dream will be realized sooner or later, and well, of course, we rely very much on the help of NASA, and here comes part of Ukrainian history, of course, which is important to be learned not only in Ukraine but in the United States and in all other countries of the world.
Heidi, if I might just add something I read, that when he was in the Gulag, and I've forgotten the name of the Russian who was tasked to put together a team to do exploration space, And he insisted that Korolyov had to be part of that team. And that's how they got him out of the, I guess, out of the gulag. At least that's what I read somewhere. So I don't.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ambassador, for that enlightenment, and Nadia for adding a little bit more content to that. Thank you so much. Now I've noticed there's quite a few questions that are coming up in regards to climate change, and so one of them, I'll direct this to Simonetta, is, how can spaceflight efforts continue in full compliance with the UN's and World Health Organization and Americans' green goals with respect to climate?
Well, yes, it's quite an interesting question. It would require quite a long answer. I'm not going to do so. I'm trying really to summarize. Well, first of all, I want to mention something that is very close to my heart, and is the fact that I'm really advocating the fact that space is an extremely important tool across the board. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which means the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Without space, all the member states which committed to by 2030 to really reach those goals will be in huge difficulties in really reaching these goals. Space is really a good tool across the board. And if we look in particular at climate change, let me mention the fact that the WMO and the GCOS, they together define the so-called essential climate variables, which are the variables that you have to take into consideration and monitor if you want to really talk about the evolution of climate, okay? And also to see what to do in terms of adaptation and mitigation. So out of 54 essential climate variables, more than half can only be monitored from space. Well, this is something that I really want to underline every time I can, which means without space, we cannot even talk about climate change. And in particular, we cannot even talk about what we want to do in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So that's absolutely mandatory to keep in mind, not only for policy and decision-making processes or the decision and policymakers, but also for the public, because it's really important. So space is, as you know well, the space station, which is a marvelous, outcome of the humanity ingenuity and creativity, is a wonderful machine. And the astronauts are envoy of humankind, bringing really inspiration, but a lot of technology, a lot of research, a lot of things about the quest of trying to really explore and increase our knowledge as a human species. But the main point is that there are a lot of benefits that we can get from space on Earth. And this is exactly what I do. In my past life, I was director of human spaceflight at the European Space Agency. So I also was on the other side with big programs. I was director of science at the Italian Space Agency. So I really contributed to a lot of programs. Now what I'm doing here at the UN is really using space for the benefit of everyone. It's the other side of the medal, if you want, having a lot of experience on the other parts. What I'm trying to say is that there is a lot to be done, really a lot to be done. And but the main point is let's really look at space as the key tool for trying to tackle all the challenges that we as humanity have to deal with, and in particular climate change. And we are really committed to do so.
Okay, thank you. Do any of our other panelists have anything to add to that?
I think just to kind of follow up on that, I think, the Earth observation system, and NASA's role in thinking of in terms of climate change and how that, that data is collected on orbit, I think is incredibly important to this, to make sure we keep that in the forefront. That space exploration also tells us a lot about life back on Earth as well. One of the programs that is just important to me right now from a research standpoint and an ongoing standpoint is the NASA Serhiy program. And Serhiy, it's a program that attempts to put data in the hands, earth science, applications, data in the hands of people at a village level to help them make decisions about their life. So this impact of, why do we explore space? It goes back to a village level of trying to, improve upon crop yields, make sure water conditions are good from a, from water purity and atmosphere purity. So there's so many things to consider here. So yeah, I think that's an important question and something always to keep in the forefront of our mind there.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And the other question that came in regards that also did mention climate change, and I would ask for either one of the two space agencies, either from Chairman Taftai or Brian, if you want to answer, that the reader or viewer writes, given the importance of space to our understanding of and the solutions of the primates of climate change, how important is it to constrain the militarization of space, and how can that be achieved?
I'll see to the chairman on that.
So,
безумовно, як на мене, найбільш практичним засобом не мілітаризувати космос – це вирішення питань цивільних і вирішення питань суспільства у космосі. Тобто створення космічних проєктів мирного характеру, воно буде сприяти демілітаризації космосу. І я би зосередився саме на цьому. Чим більше ми будемо працювати у форматі мирних досліджень, освоєння місяця, освоєння інших планет, тим більше ця робота вона буде поєднувати, а поєднання це буде сприяти зменшенню тиску міжнародного і демілітаризації у цілому.
Yes, and I fully agree with that. And I think that's also, and Brian mentioned this in his comments, that when the United States established NASA, that it was entirely intended to be a civilian organization.
Exactly. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's a peaceful exploration of outer space, and that's, from NASA's standpoint, I think that's always in the forefront of our mind is, making sure we do this in a way that benefits humanity, across the board.
Okay, and so another question that we have from one of our viewers that saying that what is the main conclusion Ukraine as a state needs to make to not repeat the mistakes of the past in terms of treating talents and geniuses like Mr. Korolyov? And I think this is also in terms of trying to retain the intellectual capital and also trying to stimulate more interest in the space program and interest in science and technology among our youth, because they are the future for not just the space program, but for our country. How are we going to tackle that challenge of maintaining our intellectual capital as we go forward in space?
Якщо дозволите.
Okay.
Well, I think the answer is very simple. All we do based on our understanding of environment, of situation in the world, and definitely on the base of the knowledge of the history. The knowledge of the history, and including the history of Serhiy Korolyov, it's an example what was done, how it was done, what should we do in the future, and what should not we should not do in the future. Knowing the history, remembering the history, it's important part of understanding what we should do in the future. And definitely all nations, all countries, including Ukraine, has some good and bad parts of history. We are proud of Serhiy Korolyov, and we definitely not very proud of some parts of his history, like, you know, he was in a prison and something like that. And it's this question should probably connect it with a previous question about militarization of the space. The less militarization, the more civil project we have, the better situation we have, the less risks we have of which can happen, something like with Korolyov. I would like to also really appreciate our ambassador Yelchenko. I was really impressed of his knowing of history of Korolyov, and I was really impressed of how ambassador is interested in the history of Gagarin space programs and space situation in Ukraine. And I also would like to add some good and interesting points about Serhiy Korolyov. As you know, he was graduated as a civil engineer for airplanes, and he started designing and production of airplanes. And then his airplanes was transferred to airplanes powered with rocket engines. And that is why, that's the way how he came to the rockets, actually. And I found it's very interesting in terms of how people starting doing something they can transfer to new technologies, to new ideas from something very similar at the beginning, what have been done by different engineers at the time and 30s, you know, building airplanes, came to the rockets. And I believe we should support engineers and support dreamers, because all new technologies comes through the dreams. Before any new technology is created, nobody knows about those technologies, and everything started from the dreams. So supporting new engineers and new genius, it should be synonym of supporting of dreams. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chairman Toftai. I fully agree that that inspiring dreams is where our future is going to go. And since we've been talking about a lot of the past history, here's one other question that came up regarding Professor Rifat Aparzov, a famous rocket scientist, a Crimean Tatar, who was one of Sergei Korolyov's colleagues for decades. He was part of Korolyov's team that developed the Energia Burak space program. And the question is, what role did he play in Yuri Gagarin's historic flight? And as a Crimean Tatar, he was to be fired but Professor Apazov was kept in the program thanks to Korolyov's intervention. So is there any mention of Professor Apasov's role in the Ukrainian space program?
If you allow me, yes?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
if you allow me, well, probably our colleague from Kiev, from the space agency, knows more. But what I can promise is that, well, I was not aware of this part of the history, but we have very good contacts with the American Association of Crimean Tatars, with its, chairperson. Ayla Bakali, and we will certainly try to find, the trace. I'm pretty sure that if this question comes from the local American Crimean Tatar community, then there should be some information about this person, and we will try at least to find it out, on this side. But obviously, I think this is a part of the work of state agency. In Ukraine, probably we need to look in the museum of Serhiy Korolyov in Zhytomyr, and probably we'll be able to find some, interesting parts of this story. I think it's very important, including even politically, given the current situation around Crimea. I think it would be very important to see how the prominent Crimean Tatars, what was the role they were playing in the Soviet, science and space programs. It's extremely important. So I can only promise that we will take care of the part of the work which can be done from here, from the United States.
Okay, thank you for those those comments. Another question that we have that came in is asking, are there plans to regenerate the work of the center in the city of Dnipro?
Якого саме?
Yes,
Which center?
that is all that the question asked, is the work of the center in the city of Dnipro. So
Okay, probably it was question about center of education for young people, and this center is completely operational and it's in service. So it's we have museum also operating there. Probably it's a limited access there due to COVID restrictions and limitations that we have. But in general, it's absolutely operational center.
okay, thank you. And so switching gears, going back to, I'll give this question to Brian, because they're asking, did NASA develop the Lunar Orbiter Rendezvous concept independently, or did NASA rely on the work of Yuri Kondratyov and others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, Lunar Orbit Rendezvous was, it's a matter of orbital mechanics, right? So it's, once you figure out what you're going to do, you rely on a theoretical framework for moving forward with mathematics. And so I think they definitely built upon a framework. The idea as implemented for the Apollo program came from the work of folks at Langley Research Center, John Hubbold kind of being the person who at the forefront of that. But yeah, definitely these guys are not reinventing orbital mechanics at Langley Research Center. They are relying on the theories that put forward for a long time in that field. Good question though.
Okay. Nadia, I believe you're muted.
Okay, so I said, I think we've passed our time. And so if panelists have any closing remarks that they would like to make? No?
I'll just go ahead and say from my perspective, I really appreciate all the work that the US-Ukraine Foundation did in establishing this webinar, this forum, because I know that even for myself, I learned quite a lot about just the entire spectrum of the cooperation and collaboration in space, everything from past history, things that I did not know about, Ukraine's involvement in the past and how we're going on to the future. So I really appreciate putting together this effort, and a wonderful panel. And like I said, even for myself, I feel like I learned quite a bit, and it was very, very enlightening to me. So thank you very much, Nadia.
Yes, thank Heidi. I second your comments, and I must give credit to the embassy really for reaching out to our great panelists. And as you say, I learned a lot. And it's very important, I think, that history be recorded accurately. Korolyov was denied his identity. Even his name was classified until after his death. And I think he would be disheartened if he came back and saw that we in the free world have not changed that, and that we are unwittingly sort of playing into the Kremlin's propaganda that every accomplishment that was made by the Soviet Union, and now that equates Russia. So, Mr. Ambassador, I think we pledge to you, I know you're leaving shortly, that we will continue the challenge of correcting this history. I recall that Sikorsky had for the longest time been identified as a Russian, and that took a massive effort to get that corrected. It's not only important for historical purposes, but as an organization that's involved in promoting US-Ukraine relations at the bilateral, or if you want to say private sector level, one of the challenges is for the world to appreciate the talent that exists in Ukraine. And I think that's important for people to understand who contributed what, and that legacy of talent remains to this day. And it would encourage, I think, maybe companies or others to look at Ukraine as an opportunity for partnering for future success and research. So for me, I think it has both a very important current reason to change this, correct this history, as well as the historical value. So Brian, we're going to be knocking on your door. So again, in closing, I second what Heidi said. I learned a lot. I thank the embassy for assembling this great panel. Ambassador Yelchenko, again, I know you're leaving shortly. We wish you Godspeed. And thank you for your service in this very particularly challenging time of COVID. And I hope the people in Kyiv appreciate what has been done even during these challenging times. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
And goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.